The Atlantic Ocean isn't known for its warm waters. If you took a spring dip off the coast of Ireland, for instance, you'd do well to last more than a few minutes before scampering back for a towel.
But for the fish, plants, reptiles, mammals and more who make those chilly depths their home, 2023 is seeing a record-breaking heat wave. Some areas around the coast of the UK are up to 5 degrees hotter than normal.
Now, this is an extreme event, but it's one of many similar stories that we're getting used to hearing worldwide. Our oceans are in trouble.
We've changed the chemistry, the fundamental chemistry of something which covers the majority of our planet.
A colony that could be hundreds of years old, within a month you come back and it's just dead.
We had enough marine wildlife to feed millions of people. We no longer do.
So, what exactly is happening down there in the depths? How have humans caused such damage? And what does the future look like for marine life?
From the Natural History Museum, this is Our Broken Planet, where we find out how we created some of the problems of our modern world and search for solutions from nature and science. I'm Khalil Thurlaway.
And I'm Tori Khalil. Across this series, we'll be exploring the interconnected issues facing our Earth and asking the question, what can we do about it?
And today, we'll be talking about the incredible life that lives in our oceans. Fish, corals, mollusks, jellyfish, and more.
It's the more that's key, right? Because there is so much more. The diversity of the oceans is not only immense, and in some ways, I don't want to say unfathomable, but we're still fathoming it. And to the extent that so many species are discovered every year. I would like to admit at this stage, I'm somebody who definitely understands the terrestrial world better than the ocean. And for me, as somebody who is learning all the time on this front, I am faced with surprise after surprise. Sea mouse? Sea mouse? I mean, incredible things. Have you seen a sea mouse?
I've seen a sea hare.
Oh my God, well, I think they may be related, but they're not mice and they're not hares, they're not mammals, they are worms. Worms! A sea mouse is a worm.
So a sea hare is a type of sea slug. The more you find out about the ocean, the weirder and cooler it gets. But it's not just a home for a massive variety of forms of life. It's also an enormous heat and carbon sink for our planet, which at a time when we're producing a lot of carbon, without the oceans, we'd be in a pretty rough spot.
It is doing an amazing job at mitigating, some of the input that we are having directly into the atmosphere, into our world system, and it is absorbing that stuff. But when something absorbs, it has an effect on the ocean itself. I mean, just look at global sea surface temperature. It's increased about 0.8 degrees Celsius since the turn of the 20th century, since 1901.
And, 0.8 degrees might not seem like a lot, but temperature rise lags behind global warming. And so even after we get the larger problem, the root cause under control, sea temperatures are still going to rise. And they're heating faster than at any point in the last 10,000 years.
Yeah, don't forget, of course, it's not just the temperature. We also mentioned it's absorbing all that CO2. And when you absorb something like carbon dioxide, it has an effect. It has a direct effect on the chemistry of our oceans, but more on that later. The oceans, of course, are enormous, but we're going to start in one particular place, and that's the tropics and coral reefs.
Of course we're going to start in the tropics.
Yeah, of course we are. Not only are they beautiful, but they're also really, really vulnerable and being impacted right now. Warming temperatures are turning these vibrant, colourful, underwater paradises into what have been described as coral graveyards.
As you dive in and you go down, you're really eye level with this reef.
This is Sanne Tuijten, a marine biologist working out in Bonaire, a tiny island in the Caribbean.
There's so many sounds. You hear the fish, you hear the little, critters going around, moving around. Coral reefs are not quiet at all. There's lobsters hiding in crevices. There's very bright and colorful and vibrant sea snails, slugs. And as you kind of swim over this reef, you can look up and down, and everywhere there's this like activity.
Coral reefs are absolutely teeming with life. While they make up less than 1% of the ocean, 25% of all marine species rely on corals.
Every time, even though you go over a reef 20 times, you see something else. There could be a turtle coming up from the depths. There could be big fish just kind of slowly moving. If you're really lucky, you might see sharks coming by. And there's just so much activity that was just also really unexpected. And that's what makes it so magical.
However, due to climate change, coral reefs are under pressure. When temperatures rise, they undergo a process called bleaching.
So corals, most people think maybe that they're stones or plants, but actually they're animals. Coral that you're familiar with are actually hundreds and thousands of coral polyps that make this one animal. They live together with algae. This algae does photosynthesis, so like a plant, it absorbs the light and then produces sugar. And this coral really likes the sugar that the algae produces.
But the beautiful relationship between algae and corals become toxic when the temperatures rise.
The rising temperatures cause corals to bleach. Let's say you're used to 29 degrees, a difference of 1 degree, 30 degrees for a couple weeks, and the coral says, I don't want you here anymore, and kind of kicks out the algae. And that's what you see a reef of white corals. It's actually the skeletons. This is a really big problem right now, not only Bonaire, but everywhere.
Sanne is operations manager at the Bonaire Reef Renewal Foundation, a non-profit organisation that studies and attempts to restore the local reefs.
What we do is we want to restore Bonaire's reefs, but also give them a chance to gain some resiliency. We want to increase the abundance of the coral, so we want to put more corals on the reef. But then also we're focusing on increasing the genetic diversity, because we're the same species, right? But maybe I get the flu quicker than you, but then maybe you get less sunburn. And corals are kind of the same, so one of them might be better equipped to handle temperature increases, while there's the other one is better doing with too many nutrients in the water. And so what you want to do is you also want to increase this genetic diversity that's on the reefs.
This task is a big one. Bonaire's reefs have shrunk massively over recent decades.
Residents of Bonaire, they talk about forests of corals. They literally had to hack away a path to be able to exit the corals going into the wider ocean. And now it's just sand. There's nothing. There's no indication that that could have ever been there, except for the beaches where it's just coral rubble, skeletons. And then you really actively see the corals dying right in front of you, like a colony that could be hundreds of years old. Within a month, you come back and it's just dead. And that's really, I'm looking for the right word. It's kind of sets you a reality check.
But there's still hope for coral. Sanne and the Bonaire Reef Renewal Foundation have had some success in creating new areas of reef. The process is to take samples of corals and grow them on artificial structures. They then choose an underwater site and outplant, i.e. reintroduce, their corals.
We outplant thousands of corals in one go to make sure they all have the best chance to survive. Overall, we have outplanted over 50,000 corals to the reef right now. And that's also the thing that I, for me, really love about my work is you really see the difference that you make. You know, my first corals that I outplanted when I started this job, now they're so much bigger. So every time you go back, you're realizing, okay, you know, what we're doing does make a difference. And we just kind of keep going and keep finding ways to kind of adapt to what's happening, adapt to, you know, challenges that are coming up.
Jay, what I really liked about one of the things that Sanne told me was that like not only did she like basically almost like do her first scuba dives on Bonaire and has gone back there to work, but also she says, you know, when you go to some of the natural reefs, the branching corals, they swim over them and there's not much there, like you can see the end of the reefs. But on some of their oldest renewed reefs, you can swim over and they just stretch ahead of you. You don't see the end of them, even in that short time. And that feeling of like no end is a really, you know, that's a
powerful image.
It's a powerful image, you know, that idea of that. And, you know, and I just, like, yeah, it's just a nice feeling to think, yeah, it's small, drop in the ocean, pardon the pun, but it's nice.
Yeah, and, I actually have scuba dived in Bonaire.
No.
Yeah, back in like 2007 or 8 or something. And it's the only time I've ever been to the Caribbean. And I had this image in my head of like these kind of Finding Nemo style reefs that would be all brightly colored and full of life. But a lot of them, yeah, like she's describing, were these pale, crumbling graveyards. And so it's really, really beautiful to hear that other visual image and the signs of progress and recovery when we decide to actively help and restore an ecosystem that's under pressure.
Exactly. I mean, yes, okay. Can we do that for the entire world? Probably not. If global heating reaches 1.5 degrees C, which is a kind of optimistic target at the moment, we may shoot beyond that, then the ocean will warm. And what does that mean for corals, right? The data for that globally, it suggests that no corals will escape being bleached, at least tropical corals, right? We're not talking about the deep water ones, like the ones that have algae as symbionts, the ones that get bleached in the shallow warm waters. As that water warms, they are vulnerable. Even
so far, we've already lost about 40% of the world's coral reefs. And that's partly from bleaching, but it's also partly from, dynamiting holes in them for shipping lanes and damage from, unethical tourism practices and stuff like that.
There's also another issue, something that some people have called the evil twin of climate change.
Wait, there's a good twin?
Okay, yeah, good point. The eviler twin of climate change, and that's ocean acidification.
Ocean acidification is what happens when carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves into the ocean and it makes it more acidic than it is now.
That's Sebastian Hennige from the University of Edinburgh.
So even since the Industrial Revolution, the oceans have absorbed about 30% of the carbon dioxide that we've released into the atmosphere. So we'll never put our hand in and get acid burns from ocean acidification, but it is becoming more acidic.
Right. Time for a very quick science lesson.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah, well, okay, very, very quick. Cast your mind back to school. Acidity is measured on the pH scale. Now, the ocean pH isn't changing that much. It's not a massive change. However, even a small change in the pH level can be a really big deal.
Yeah, I guess we have to remember that marine life is living in this water all the time.
Yeah, so it's not like sucking on a lemon or like dropping themselves into vinegar or anything as dramatic as that. But these animals are constantly exposed, and for some of them, that means the ocean is literally eating away at their skeletons.
I remember one comment from one news commentator, and I think it was somebody arguing that deforestation wasn't that big of a deal, because what they said was, the oceans will be able to absorb all this carbon dioxide. And to a point, they were right. The oceans did absorb a huge amount of carbon dioxide, but to the point where we've changed the chemistry, the fundamental chemistry of something which covers the majority of our planet.
Sebastian's work looks at the damage acidification could cause cold water coral reefs, cousins of the tropical corals but sitting in much deeper water. One of these changes is that their skeletons become more porous. In other words, more holes appear in their structure.
It makes it far more brittle. And so just like osteoporosis in humans, brittle bone disease, this coral porosis was leading to a weakening of coral skeletons, which can lead them to snap or crumble under pressure. There are some reefs which are living in acidified conditions, which the future of many coral reefs may be like. And what we see is that, importantly, there still is cold water coral, but all that framework, all that complexity of habitat which we usually associate with them is gone. So instead you're getting this bare exposed rock and corals living amongst it and on top of it, but it's not forming these structurally complex habitats.
And zooming out, it's not just coral. Acidification will have an impact all across the ocean, from the bottom of food chains all the way to the top.
So mussels, scallops, clams, oysters, there's an organism called a pteropod. They're found throughout the world's oceans, and many, many fish species eat them. They're being referred to as the potato chips of the sea. And we're starting to see the shells of these sea snails start to dissolve. And so this means that they're less protected, there's going to be less of them as well, and we're already seeing this start to impact the food chains around these pteropods. These are the kind of threats which will make ecosystem scale changes. And in 50 years' time, the environment that we'll be looking at globally is going to be different.
The acidification of our oceans, it's not something we think about as much as temperature so much. It's not talked about as much. But this sounds like it's really going to impact the entire ways that ecosystems throughout the world's oceans work.
I think it's one of those interesting things, isn't it? I mean, it's like that point that Sebastian made is that on one hand, the ocean is this is a potential tool in dealing with like other aspects of the climate crisis, and it's like kind of like joined up thinking needs to happen a bit. You can't. You sort of think, oh, we can fix that bit by putting it here, but then you've got to think about, well, what happens to that other bit you've changed, because the world is an interconnected system. Yeah, everything is connected.
Also, we're hearing echoes of that old mindset of, oh, the ocean is infinite. We can just keep putting stuff in it, and it'll just disappear. And it's the way that people used to think about, for example, land in places like America as it was being colonized, and it's also how people are thinking about space. And actually, space immediately around Earth is starting to fill up with junk.
Yeah, there's already a lot of stuff up there, isn't there? Exactly that idea that you can just like pop something up there and leave it behind. I mean, look at all the flags that have been left on the moon.
Yeah, and all those thousands and thousands of microsatellites that people are launching all the time now.
Yeah.
But coming back to our relationship with the seas.
Sometimes out of sight, out of mind, right? We're not so familiar with it. It's like it goes under there, you can't see it.
I think you hit the nail on the head because, we love the sea and we like, seeing creatures from it, and we love eating creatures from it, some of us. But it is this thing of we very rarely actually see under the water. So what are some of the solutions that we can work towards to either alleviate the acidification or to mitigate some of the consequences of it? I mean, the big one is to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions, because it's the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere that's dissolving in the sea and making it more acidic.
Yeah. I mean, that is obviously the fundamental thing we keep coming back to again and again and again, is you can't ignore that big, top line, which is, fix the source of all of these problems. Beyond that, there are localised things we can do to try and find, sticking plaster solutions until we fix the big ones.
Well, like we heard from Reef Renewal, who are reseeding corals.
What I think is really interesting about that kind of connection between what people like Sanne and Reef Renewal are doing in these kind of artificial, kind of rewilding coral reefs approaches, where they're using artificial structures to grow corals and then replant them. That really dovetails with what Sebastian was telling me about other potential efforts to kind of think about how you might have an artificial deep sea reef, because the issue with acidification is not that it kills the corals. The corals seem to be okay. The issue is their structure is being eaten away, right? So you could potentially provide them with an artificial structure, right? You see it on shipwrecks, like shipwrecks sink, and you see artificial reefs growing.
Well, I've seen some really lovely examples of people dumping old military hardware into the water to serve as artificial reefs. That's quite a nice image. It's a kind of swords to plowshares vibe.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's sort of also bleak.
At least we're getting rid of them, Getting rid of weapons and creating coral reefs. I'm down.
Yeah.
Now, not every species in our changing oceans is on the losing end of this deal. And there's one in particular that's quite close to me. And that's close in a literal sense. I have quite a large tattoo of it on me.
As a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut and go into outer space and find aliens.
That's Lucas Brotz from the University of British Columbia.
But I had a moment of realization where the underwater world is an unexplored region that's full of aliens.
And the alien that he studied for 15 years is the jellyfish.
Certainly jellyfish do have a bad reputation with many people. One thing most people know about jellyfish is that they can sting you. And it's probably in the hundreds, if not thousands of people a year that die from jellyfish stings. Jellyfish do interfere with human activities in a number of other ways. They interfere with fisheries, they clog fishing nets and spoil the catch. But they're also highly beneficial in a number of ways. Jellyfish are a natural presence in healthy ecosystems. They're food for hundreds of species of fish, for seabirds and turtles as well. They play a really strong role in the ecosystem in that way, and they're very important predators as well.
Lucas's research found jellyfish numbers are growing. There's a few theories why this might be. First among them, you guessed it, global warming.
Jellyfish reproduction is often triggered by warming temperatures in the spring. And so if those warmer temperatures are being reached earlier in the year, as we have sort of more early springs, that could cause jellyfish to show up earlier, and they stick around longer. As well, many jellyfish are sort of limited in their habitat and range by the temperatures that they're experiencing. And so if the oceans rise in temperature, it may expand some of that habitat. And we're definitely seeing this with some of the more dangerous stinging jellyfish, where they are showing up in areas that were previously inhospitable to them.
Humans have been impacting jellyfish in other, more direct ways too. Overfishing, for example, has reduced their natural predators.
We take just a staggering amount of seafood out of the oceans, upwards of 100 million tons a year, which is just a figure that it's hard to even comprehend. A lot of fish will eat jellyfish opportunistically, eat them when there's no other food around, or if they're just looking for, kind of a quick snack. Jellyfish aren't very high in nutritional value, but they're very easy to catch and they're very easy to digest.
And elsewhere, fertilizer from farmland running into rivers and oceans can kick off a series of events called eutrophication. And this results in big dead zones of water, which don't contain enough oxygen to support most kinds of life.
One group of organisms that can tolerate low oxygen conditions quite well are jellyfish. They have a very low metabolism, and in fact, they even have an ability to go to sort of more oxygenated areas, store oxygen in their tissues, and then return to these lower oxygenated areas. It's almost like having a little scuba tank where you can, store up oxygen and use it in these other regions.
So jellyfish numbers are a symptom of human interference. But if we can improve our relationship with the ocean, Lucas isn't too worried about an unstoppable jellyfish army.
Jellyfish are a natural presence in healthy ecosystems. We know they've been around for probably at least 500 million years. If you restore sort of healthy ecosystems by polluting less, overfishing less, developing less, a lot of areas where we've just left the ocean alone, the ocean really seems to respond to that and thrive and creates these healthy ecosystems where jellyfish are a part of it, but they're not the only part of it. And if we do a number of things to restore and improve the health of our oceans, the jellyfish problems will hopefully help take care of themselves.
Now, I gotta come clean here, express some bias. I love jellyfish. I love them for a lot of the same reasons that Lucas does. They're so alien and weird and peaceful, but also dangerous. And I have eaten jellyfish before, despite them being an animal that I really love. It's hard to describe without making it sound gross. So actually, I've got some here.
Oh my God, okay. Let's have a look.
Okay.
Look at that. It is a little bit stretchy, but also kind of beautiful, right? It's glistening like a kind of wobbly icicle.
Bottoms up.
Here
we go.
Okay.
So what's the texture like?
It is crunchy. No, it's completely fine. It doesn't taste marine. It definitely tastes marine. It's got a kind of seaweed, but crunch. Let's just keep on eating them. Delicious.
I mean, it might interfere with the rest of the chat.
It might do. It's actually quite good though, right?
They are good.
They're quite good.
So on the subject of our relationship with the oceans and food, let's talk about fisheries.
Coming back to the idea of is the ocean a resource or a wilderness? I mean, it's both. But we can't ignore the fact that it is also a resource, right? And humans eat a lot of fish.
And when you say a lot, we catch about 100 million tons worth every year. And around a third of fish stocks in the world are thought to be in a state of being overfished. Biomass is being extracted from them faster than it can regenerate. Back in the 70s, it was about a tenth of our fish stocks were overfished. So that's been a massive increase. And that connects us back to the exploding jellyfish.
Yeah, well, hang on. There's a bit more jellyfish rustling around here because it's so. It's actually quite Moorish.
I
it
am
looks
so
disgusting.
glad that I've converted you to the Church of Jellyfish.
I mean, the interesting thing about the whole fisheries thing, which I find fascinating, is if you look at the data, actually, like actual fishing numbers, like take-catch numbers, haven't changed much since the 90s. People are eating more fish, but mostly it's aquaculture. So in that sense, it's kind of interesting that we've kind of hit this kind of plateau since the 90s, but it's still a problem.
Yeah, and so to clarify, the plateau you're talking about is not a plateau of the amount of fish we have, it's a plateau of the rate at which we're taking fish out.
Exactly, yeah. The fishing is happening at the same rate. Even at that level, it's a problem, right? You know, these fisheries are under threat, and they keep on being fished at that rate, we will face problems. And if there's no more fish, there's no more fishing, and that is an industry that supports a lot of people, a lot of people around the world,
and at various scales. You know, it can be supporting your family in terms of putting food on the table, or it can be keeping a community or a town economically viable. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is at least one fish staging a little bit of a comeback. The bluefin tuna. Having been massively overfished in the past, they've recently reappeared in UK waters. And when John Horston of the Blue Planet Society realised this, he began campaigning for it to be a protected species.
They are massive. A fully grown adult bluefin tuna. They're about the size of a transit van. They are the fastest fish in the ocean. They're warm-blooded because they need to swim at such speeds. They're a predatory fish, so they feed on mackerel, they feed on anything really smaller than itself. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful. They're blue, they shine. And when they leap out of the water, you could compare them with anything on the land.
The story of the bluefin tuna is an interesting one. For around 50 years, they vanished from UK waters. Scientists believe that overfishing of herring, a common component of the tuna's diet and of course a British seafood staple, contributed to their disappearance.
All these timings are a bit sketchy, but they think they disappeared probably around about 1950, 60, with the collapse of the herring populations in the North Sea. Herring were badly overfished in the North Sea, almost to the point of functional extinction. And the bluefin tuna disappeared around about then. Now, we're not absolutely sure why they suddenly popped up again in round about 2011, but they did. They just came back, and they've come back every year since.
Bluefin tuna isn't the type you'll find in a supermarket. It's a prized fish, primarily used for high-end sushi. A single fish can be sold for astronomical prices.
You're talking about an animal that in Japan can sell for 1.5 million. It's because it's seen as a status symbol. It's the first fish of the season and they pay premiums for it. Bluefin tuna aren't worth 1.5 million yen or dollars or pounds or whatever, but they are worth a lot of money. If you catch a 500-pound bluefin tuna, that's your day's fishing paid for, and your fuel and everything else. So it's a very, very desirable animal to kill.
Despite John's campaigning, in August 2023, licenses are being handed out for a trial fishery in UK waters.
They will clamour for those licenses, and this is what worries me. The quota will grow and grow, and if that's the case, then that's a tragedy. And that's why, starting from a unique position of no bluefin tuna to having bluefin tuna, we should have taken another unique position, which is protect them, don't eat them.
So I've got a couple of graphs to show you, Tori, and
Love a graph.
right?
Love
Thought
a graph.
you would.
Yes.
Fellow scientist, you're going to love some data.
Yeah.
So if you look at the top graph here, this is the trends in Atlantic herring populations
Going down.
in the northwestern Atlantic coast.
Yeah, not good. Late 60s to 80s. Very, very bad.
Right?
Dear,
So
that's
like
awful.
we're going from like 1 million metric tons in like the 60s down to 50,000 in the early 80s, late 70s. Then it increases a little bit into the 90s, but since the mid-90s, it's gone right back down again to those bottom levels and even lower. And if you look at the second graph, that is the amount of bluefin tuna caught in the Western Atlantic.
Which is basically flatlined since
Right?
1969.
So you've got it ticking along from the late 40s to the early 60s.
Yeah, not much.
And then in the 60s, there is a massive spike. It goes up to 10 times what they used to be catching. And of course, if you start catching 10 times as many tuna, soon that population is going to plummet. And that's what you get. It goes straight down to zero. And it just flatlines until the graph ends at 2019.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm guessing that's not because people decided not to catch tuna. They were probably just still catching, trawling or whatever in that period, and they just didn't catch any tuna.
Yeah, and so, if you extend that graph to 2023, 2024, you're probably going to see a little uptick start in that amount of tuna caught. And if the population is only just starting to recover and only just starting to come back into these areas, any amount of fishing is really going to hurt their chances.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because we wouldn't think, certainly a very large number of people would not think at all about eating, say, elephant meat or lion meat or something along those lines. I think we would understand that is a rare and special animal and maybe we shouldn't be eating it. But I don't think the same thought necessarily occurs when we think of species like tuna.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, about the out of sight, out of mind relationship that a lot of us have with anything that lives below the surface of water.
And what's really frustrating to me is that we know that we have the power. We have the power to use our knowledge, the scientific knowledge we have of the marine systems, to work with the industries that exploit these areas to try and do it in a way that is sustainable. And actually, there is great work being done and conversations being had, but we need to keep that focus. We need to keep that focus that science has to inform the way that we exploit our planet.
And it also needs to be done at an international scale, because one of the things that has always been an issue with anything that happens at sea is that there's disputes over who's in charge, where the ship is registered, all sorts of international waters and stuff like that. And so it's one of those things that we can't do bit by bit.
It's funny you should say that, because just this year, major moment, and a reason to be optimistic, because just this year, 2023, the United Nations actually came together and signed a historic agreement called the High Seas Treaty.
So basically, we've been calling this the biggest conservation victory of all time.
This is Megan Randalls, global political lead for Greenpeace's Protect the Ocean campaign. They have been pushing for this treaty since 2005.
So what it does, it sets up a new framework so that we can establish high seas marine protected areas. And that didn't previously exist at all. So whilst, we talk about 30 by 30, the globally agreed target to protect 30% of the oceans by 2030, whilst this doesn't actually do that, it kind of provides the legal tools for the first time so that we can actually deliver that. This was agreed in February, so all countries came together to compromise, and it was just adopted in June, and it was adopted by consensus, so all countries agreed to it, which is really good as well.
Megan mentioned the 30 by 30 target there. That's the 2021 agreed plan by over 100 countries to protect 30% of both ocean and land by 2030. The High Seas Treaty is a roadmap, but the job isn't finished.
So obviously it's a great political moment, but it's only worth the paper that it's written on until we can actually bring it to life by actually getting these proposals in and getting these sites put off limits to destruction.
The treaty sets up regular conferences for countries to propose these protected sites and offers a legal framework to enforce the agreements.
It is a massive, massive win for nature. We can't be complacent, though. Obviously, we did celebrate the agreement being finalised back in March, and had a bit of a celebration in June as well when it got passed through. It gives us hope that nature and ocean protection and people can triumph over geopolitics in such a divided time. So it's really, really important that we actually get these sites in. So yeah, I'll celebrate again in 2030, but absolutely massively good news story. The best news story that I can think of in my time working at Greenpeace.
I remember seeing that. Obviously it's this year, but I really remember how vivid it was because Rena Lee, who was the conference president, said,
"The ship has reached the shore.
And she was clearly like really, really emotional about it, because I think those discussions are exhausting.
I mean, I'm amazed that they managed to get all 193 member states to agree, because they can't even get 193 member states to agree that ethnic cleansing is bad.
That is one of the key take-homes, right, though? It can be done, but it only took them 20 years, right? Remember that. It's been 20 years.
We've always known we're playing a long game, though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But it is like that in itself is like a great win for like multilateralism, like for the fact that these countries can work together, because they're certainly not working together on other topics. Now what's got to happen is it's got to be ratified, and that happens in the nation states. And they need at least 60 nation states have to ratify it for that treaty to go through.
And also, this treaty talks about and addresses legal frameworks for stuff and regulation. But, just as cropped up in pretty much every episode of our last series, Wild Crimes,
check it out.
Like
All
and subscribe
episodes
wherever you get
available.
your podcasts. Things fall through the gaps. Like, you can legislate as much as you want, but you still get illegal, unregulated, unreported aspects of all these industries. And so fishing is no exception to that.
No, exactly. These things are regulated, right, to a certain degree. Like shipping is regulated to a certain degree. Fisheries are regulated to a certain degree. We know people don't always do what they are supposed to do.
Well, yeah, you can make as many rules as you want, but if you don't enforce them, do they count?
And what do you get on the high seas? Pirates.
Yar. And talking about the 30 by 30 target, how do we feel about that? Is 30% enough?
I have to say I have no feelings about that. It does sometimes feel like a number plucked out of the ether, doesn't it? I mean, I guess it's better than nothing. I mean, I guess that's a starting point. I'm more concerned that ratifying a treaty, I mean, that takes years, and we're only 7 years away from 2030.
And then making the change it takes to then implement that. It does seem like a pretty tight timescale.
And that's just like, that's just to ratify and then, actually start the process of proposing a marine protected area. So maybe I'm sceptical, but I think it's really important to have goals. And legally binding goals. Now, we have got people signed up to...
What does legally binding mean?
Well, let's not be too pessimistic. It's the end of the episode.
Sure. I'm sure we won't blow...
Have some jellyfish.
I'm sure we won't blow past this goal just like we've blown past so many of the climate goals. But fingers crossed.
And don't worry, because there's always jellyfish.
Delicious, delicious jellyfish.
Thanks for listening to Our Broken Planet. We hope you've learned something along the way, and please don't despair. We all have an important role to play in helping to fix the problems in our world, and it starts with having conversations like the ones in this episode. As many as possible. If you found it helpful, why not share this episode with friends and family?
Let us know what you thought about this episode and join the conversation on social media using the hashtag OurBrokenPlanet. Or check out the bonus content and resources over on nhm.ac.uk/podcast.
Next time, we're exploring what happens when wildlife and human habitats get a little too close.
The results can be pretty nasty. We're talking about zoonotic diseases. Our Broken Planet is presented by Tori Khalil and me, Khalil Thurlaway. The producers were John Rogers and James Tyndale, and the executive producer was Will Yates. Our Broken Planet is a Whistledown production for the Natural History Museum.